The morning I met the woman who changed my life forever began like any other ordinary day. The sun hung bright above the city skyline, casting golden reflections across glass buildings and crowded sidewalks. People hurried through their routines, chasing schedules, deadlines, and responsibilities. I was one of them, carrying a worn leather messenger bag and a mind full of worries I couldn't seem to escape. But before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand something. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the doorway to a destiny you never saw coming. Sometimes a single cup of coffee can rewrite an entire future. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that one small gesture can change a life, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to Lifeline Hub. Stories like this remind us that miracles often arrive disguised as ordinary moments. At 34 years old, I had become an expert at surviving but not living. 3 years earlier, I had lost my father after a long battle with illness. The grief had settled into my heart like a permanent winter. Since then, my days had blended together into an endless cycle of work, sleep, and loneliness. I worked as a graphic designer for a marketing company, spending most of my time staring at screens and creating campaigns for products I barely cared about. My apartment felt more like a waiting room than a home. The walls were clean but empty. The silence inside those rooms often felt louder than the traffic outside. Friends had tried setting me up on dates. None of them worked. Some conversations felt forced. Others disappeared after a few messages. Eventually, I stopped trying. It seemed easier to focus on work than to risk disappointment again. I convinced myself that maybe some people simply weren't meant to find lasting connection. That particular Tuesday morning started with a missed train and a ruined presentation file that had vanished from my laptop overnight. My boss was expecting answers, and I had none. Frustrated and exhausted, I stepped into a small coffee shop called Harbor Bean, hoping caffeine could somehow rescue the disaster unfolding in my day. The place was busy with students, professionals, and tourists escaping the growing heat outside. The smell of roasted coffee beans filled the air. Soft music played from hidden speakers. For a few moments, I stood in line and tried to organize my thoughts. Then I noticed her. She stood near the register, searching through her purse with growing concern. She looked elegant without trying to. Dark chestnut hair rested on her shoulders. Her eyes carried a quiet sadness that somehow made them even more beautiful. She wasn't drawing attention to herself, yet somehow every detail about her seemed impossible to ignore. The cashier politely explained that her card wasn't working. She tried another card. Same result. Embarrassment colored her face. A few impatient customers behind her sighed loudly. Without thinking much about it, I stepped forward. The total for her coffee was less than $5. I paid before she could protest. She looked genuinely surprised. For a second, I expected her to refuse or insist on paying me back immediately. Instead, something unusual happened. Her expression softened as if the gesture meant far more than the price of a drink. The gratitude in her eyes felt strangely personal. We moved aside after ordering. She thanked me again, and somehow a simple conversation began. Her name was Serena Hale. She worked as a landscape architect and had recently returned to the city after several years away. There was nothing extraordinary about our exchange, yet every sentence felt effortless. Minutes passed like seconds. Then her coffee was ready. She smiled warmly before leaving and wished me luck with whatever challenge had placed that worried look on my face. I watched her disappear through the doorway. And just like that, she was gone. The rest of my day improved unexpectedly. A backup copy of my presentation was recovered. The meeting succeeded. My boss praised my work. Yet somehow my mind kept returning to the stranger from the coffee shop. I told myself it was foolish. Cities are full of brief encounters. People meet and disappear every day. Still, I couldn't stop wondering about her. The following week, life returned to normal. Deadlines piled up. Meetings consumed my schedule. Gradually, I assumed I'd never see Serena again. Then fate intervened. Or at least, what I thought was fate. One Saturday afternoon, I attended a local charity event in a public garden near the river. My company had sponsored part of the fundraiser, and attendance was encouraged. I arrived expecting speeches and networking. Instead, I saw Serena. She stood among volunteers arranging flowers near a fountain. For a moment, I genuinely thought I was imagining things. When she spotted me, her reaction seemed oddly different from what I expected. Most people would look surprised. She looked relieved. Almost as if she had been waiting. We spent much of the afternoon talking. The conversation flowed naturally. We discussed childhood memories, favorite books, family struggles, career dreams, and countless small details that somehow felt important. The more I learned about her, the more fascinated I became. She wasn't just beautiful. She was compassionate, thoughtful, funny, strong. There was a depth to her that made every conversation meaningful. By sunset, I realized I hadn't felt this alive in years. When the event ended, we exchanged phone numbers. For the first time in a very long time, I found myself looking forward to tomorrow. Weeks turned into months. Coffee became lunches. Lunches became evening walks. Walks became long conversations under city lights. The relationship developed gradually, built on trust instead of excitement alone. There was something comforting about Serena's presence. Around her, I didn't feel pressure to impress anyone. I could simply be myself. Yet one mystery remained. Sometimes she looked at me with an expression I couldn't understand. As though she knew something I didn't. As though she was carrying a secret. I occasionally asked if something was wrong. She always smiled and said everything was fine. Eventually, I stopped asking. About 6 months after our first meeting, Serena invited me to spend a Saturday with her in a neighboring town. She claimed there was a place she wanted me to see. The drive took nearly 2 hours. The destination surprised me. It was a small lakeside community surrounded by trees and wildflowers. The moment we arrived, I sensed the trip carried deeper meaning. Serena seemed nervous. Her hands trembled slightly. She kept glancing toward the lake. Finally, we stopped beside a wooden bench overlooking the water. The afternoon sunlight shimmered across gentle waves. Birds drifted overhead. The entire scene felt peaceful. Yet tension lingered in the air. Then Serena took a deep breath. And everything changed. She told me she needed to reveal something she should have shared long ago. My heart immediately sank. Thousands of terrible possibilities rushed through my mind. Was she married? Was she leaving? Had she been lying about something important? Instead, what she said next left me speechless. The first time we met wasn't an accident. She had planned it. Every detail. Including the coffee shop. Including the exact morning we crossed paths. For several seconds, I simply stared at her. Nothing made sense. How could someone plan meeting a complete stranger? Then she explained. 2 years before Harbor Bean, her younger brother had been involved in a serious car accident. The crash left him hospitalized for months. Recovery seemed impossible. Medical expenses overwhelmed their family. Hope disappeared. During that difficult period, a stranger donated a substantial amount to the hospital assistance fund that covered part of her brother's treatment. The donor chose to remain anonymous. No one knew who he was. Months later, Serena's brother recovered. Their family never forgot the kindness that saved them. Eventually, Serena became determined to identify the anonymous donor and thank him personally. After a long search involving hospital records, fundraising contacts, and countless dead ends, she discovered a name. Mine. I felt stunned. The donation she described had come shortly after my father's death. At the time, grief consumed me. I remembered making the contribution because my father had always believed helping others was the most meaningful way to honor life. I never expected anyone to trace it back to me. Yet Serena had. And once she learned who I was, curiosity grew. She looked at my public social media profiles. Read articles connected to my work. Learn small details about my life. Not in an obsessive way. In a grateful way. She simply wanted to thank the stranger who had unknowingly helped save her brother. The problem was that she became afraid. What if contacting me directly felt awkward? What if I didn't want recognition? So she created another plan. She discovered the coffee shop I visited most frequently. She waited. Not every day. Not every week. But often enough. Months passed. Then one Tuesday morning, everything aligned. I walked into Harbor Bean. She intentionally stood ahead of me in line. She even knew there was a chance her card would fail because that particular account had recently experienced banking issues. What she didn't expect was my reaction. She thought I might simply watch. Instead, I bought her coffee. Exactly the kind of thing the anonymous donor would do. At that moment, she knew the stories about my kindness had been true. The entire revelation left me overwhelmed. Part of me felt shocked. Another part felt deeply moved. Of all the unbelievable possibilities, this was the last one I expected. I sat silently for several minutes as the pieces finally connected. The relieved look at our second meeting. The strange familiarity in her eyes. The feeling that she knew more than she admitted. It all made sense now. Then Serena revealed one final truth. Somewhere between gratitude and curiosity, her feelings had changed. She no longer waited to thank the man who helped her family. She had fallen in love with him. And that terrified her. Because she worried I might think the entire relationship was built on deception. Tears filled her eyes as she admitted she would understand if I walked away. I looked across the lake and thought about everything that had happened since Harbor Bean. The laughter. The memories. The support. The friendship. The trust. None of those moments felt fake. None of them felt manipulated. The connection we built was real. Maybe the meeting had been planned. But love wasn't. Love had arrived naturally. Quietly. Unexpectedly. Just like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. I reached for her hand. The relief that crossed her face remains one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed. In that moment, something shifted inside me. For years, I had carried grief like a heavy stone. I believed loss defined my future. Yet somehow, through one act of kindness made during my darkest season, life had created a path toward happiness. My father's influence had reached further than I ever imagined. His compassion had connected two strangers. His values had indirectly introduced me to the woman sitting beside me. Months later, I proposed near that same lake. The answer arrived before I even finished asking. The wedding wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. Friends and family gathered beneath sunlight and flowering trees. Serena's brother stood proudly beside us, healthy and smiling. Looking at him reminded me how interconnected lives truly are. We often underestimate the impact of small actions. A donation. A helping hand. A cup of coffee. Simple choices sometimes create ripples that travel farther than we can see. Today, years later, Serena and I still visit Harbor Bean on the anniversary of our first meeting. We sit near the same window. Order the same drinks. And laugh about the day everything began. Most people assume our story started when I bought coffee for a beautiful stranger. But that's not entirely true. It began much earlier. It started with a grieving son honoring his father's memory. It continued with a determined woman searching for the person who saved her family. And it blossomed because two people chose kindness when they had every reason to focus only on themselves. Before we reach the end of this story, I want to ask something special. If this story has touched your heart so far, please write the word kindness in the comments below. Your comment helps spread positive stories to more people who may need hope today. Years have passed since that remarkable day, but one lesson remains clear. We rarely know how our actions affect others. A kind gesture may seem small to us while becoming life-changing for someone else. The world often feels divided, rushed, and uncertain. Yet compassion still has extraordinary power. Sometimes it saves lives. Sometimes it heals wounds. And sometimes it leads two hearts exactly where they were meant to be. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the power of kindness, please like the video, leave a comment, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to Lifeline Hub. Your support allows more uplifting stories to reach people who need them most.